I'll call a meeting to order.
And then I gotta get us on Facebook here. Okay, we're live.
Okay, thank you. Good evening, everybody. I'd like to call this meeting to order, and it is the public hearing. January 26, 2022, 6 p.m. I'd like to start off with the land acknowledgement. I would like to begin by acknowledging that we are on the traditional lands of the Acadia First Nation, part of Mi'kma'ki, the ancestral territory of the Mi'kmaq people. And so item number 3, just bear with me, I'm loading my agenda item. So a statement of purpose. So the public hearing is to receive comments regarding a development agreement with 333-7402 Nova Scotia Limited, which is for the development to construct 3 4-unit residential buildings on PID 901-33786 and on PID 901-33836. And having said that, item number 4 on the agenda, call for presentations. And I apologize. I just did want to tell people. I'm also going to tell people in a regular council meeting at 7 p.m. I am chairing the meeting. Unfortunately, there's been a tragedy in Councillor Cunningham's father passed this afternoon, and our condolences to him and his family on behalf of council. So, yes. Call for presentations. 4.1 municipal planner report. So I'll hand things over to Carolyn Robertson. Carolyn?
Jenny, I just need you to allow me to share my screen. It's saying that feature's been disabled. Oh, there we go.
Thank you all.
Okay, so just confirm everybody can see my presentation here. Okay, perfect. So we're here tonight to talk about a proposal that's been brought forward by a developer for a high-density multi-unit residential development, and it's for what's being proposed is a development agreement for 38 Park Drive. So just to give you some really quick context so you know about what we're talking about, it's this lot here. It's and I'm going to get a little bit more into context as I talk about the proposal, but it's quite a large lot on Park Drive, and it already has an existing 4-unit rental building on site. So that's a picture of what that looks like. So I'm going to take a little bit step back and talk about development agreements in general, if that's okay with everyone, because I kind of heard through the grapevine that there's been some confusion from the public in general about the process that we go through when it comes to a development agreement and exactly what that means. So what is a development agreement? So development agreement is a formal agreement between council and the developer. And it's a tool that's been provided to council through the Municipal Government Act. And it's actually a legal agreement that's registered on the property, and it transitions with ownership. So it stays with the property that it's registered on until council and the property owner come to an agreement to discharge it. So it stays with the life of the property. Your municipal planning documents are where we are actually what outline the conditions to which a development agreement may be considered by council. So way back when, and I know you're going through the process again right now, but way back when you adopted your current municipal planning strategy and land use bylaw, council talked about what kind of situations they would like to allow a development agreement to happen. And that's kind of what brought us to this public hearing tonight. So how do we process development agreements in Modi? So the first thing that happens is the developer actually goes to your development office and they speak with your development officer, Roger, and they talk about the kind of development that they want to do, or what they'd like to see happen on their property. And it's usually around this time that Roger sits with them. Sometimes he gives me a call and he decides what the best approach would be, because sometimes it's a rezoning, sometimes the development could be allowed as of a right, and sometimes a development agreement is the best approach. So he kind of ticks those boxes, talks to the developer, makes sure that their application is complete. And once it's ready to be sent to, once it's totally complete and ready, that's when he sends it to your municipal planner. So that's when it comes to me and my team at C&D Community Design. So one of the big questions I get about development agreements a lot is who actually writes them, who comes up with the rules and the ideas within these agreements. So it's actually a negotiation between your municipal planner, so in this particular situation, myself, and the developer. So what we do is we sit down and I have a set of rules that are from your actual planning document. So there's a vision, usually a vision statement that council has put forth within the municipal planning strategy, as well as some specific criteria, which I'm going to go through for this specific development agreement. That kind of helps shape what council would like to see in a development. So I sit with the developer and we kind of negotiate down until we get a development agreement that we're both comfortable with proposing to council. Once we hit that step, that is actually when the proposed development agreement is brought to the Planning Advisory Committee for review. So the Planning Advisory Committee meets, they have a public information meeting in which they review the proposed agreement, as well as my accompanying report as to kind of how we came to the conclusions and the policies that are written within the development agreement. And it's at this regularly scheduled meeting that the Planning Advisory Committee will make a recommendation to council on what to do with that proposed development agreement. So after that happens, the recommendation goes to first reading at council. So you should all be pretty familiar with first reading by now, but at a regular council meeting, you'll receive that recommendation from the Planning Advisory Committee, as well as a copy of my report and the proposed agreement. So council will review it. And if council agrees that they would like to continue with the proposal, continue with considering it, that is when it gets moved to a public hearing, which is the step that we're at tonight. So once we get there, once that motion's been made to have a public hearing, that is when staff actually begin to notify the neighbors around the surrounding property and invite them to come in. So this public hearing is the opportunity for the community to provide their feedback to council on the development. The next step is second reading at council. So that's what you'll be doing tonight after your public hearing. And at this stage, what council does is they take all that information that we've collected. So you have the proposed development agreement, what you've heard from the public, any letters that have been submitted, the planner's report, and it's up to council to make an informed decision on the proposed agreement. So in the event that council agrees that they'd like to move forward with that agreement, and it's approved, that's when municipal staff step in and we begin to process enacting the agreement. And the first step is to actually have that agreement legally registered against the property's PID number so that it's there and enforceable. And that's where Roger comes in. So as most of you are aware, your development officer is the person who enforces your land use bylaw. And if a property is not adhering to the rules written within the land use bylaw, he's the one who actually will go down and try and work things out with the property owner and make sure that they follow the rules. So it works the exact same way with a development agreement. He's the enforcer, and depending on the situation, sometimes he'll bring in the municipal planner for interpretation and support when it comes to that. But that's the process from start to finish when it comes to a development agreement. So what can we put into a development agreement? So the Municipal Government Act basically allows that any controls that they allow council to put into a land use bylaw may be imposed in a development agreement. What's special about the development agreement is that those rules are specific to that property. They're registered to that property, and that property has to follow the rules that are written within the development agreement. And your municipal planning strategy and land use bylaws, which are established by council, that's where we get the vision about when a development agreement may be considered. So things like what types of uses council wants to be considered by development agreement, lot requirements, lighting, fencing, buffers, vegetation. Those are the kind of things that there's control within a development agreement. So with all that said, we're considering a proposal here tonight for 38 Park Drive for a high-density residential development intended for rental purposes. So currently there is one 4-unit rental building there, and the development agreement would be to add 3 new 4-unit buildings for a total of 16 residential units for rental purposes. So if we look at the context of the area, because this is always really important when you're considering new developments. This property is located in the residential general designation. It's largely a single unit detached dwelling type neighborhood that surrounds it. In this area, council does permit residential developments up to 4 units as of right. So that's how that 4-unit building that's there now is existing. They are in this area, anybody can apply to put in a building up to 4 units. A development agreement is required for higher density developments. So anything that is over 4 units requires a development agreement. This particular area has a public and private road system. It's serviced by central sewer. It has access to walking trails and is close proximity to the Hebron commercial area. So when we get into council's vision when it comes to housing, there's a very clear statement that within the municipal planning strategy that council has, and it's this intention to see a wider variety of housing types and to guide high quality development. And then the way that that's being done is by using a development agreement as the control to make sure that you get those high quality developments that's desired by council. So for high density developments, anything that's over 4 units in the residential general designation, there's a few requirements. So these are the ones I talked about that I would have to go through with the developer and make sure that they're incorporated within the development. The first is that in order to have a development that's over 4 units, it has to be located on a private or public design road and served by central sewer system. So that right there, there's not a huge amount of places within the municipality that meet that requirement. So Park Drive is kind of unique in the sense that it's one of those areas that kind of checks the boxes to allow for a higher density to happen. The second requirement, which is kind of neat, and I haven't seen many councils do, is that in order to have a higher density residential development within the municipality of Yarmouth, the developer has to provide a public outdoor amenity space on the lot. And then finally, council has a section 15.2, which is just a number of general requirements when it comes to considering a development agreement. So to consider high density residential developments, they'd have to go through that checklist for a development agreement there as well, which this development does meet. So I've just put together some highlights of this development agreement because it's quite extensive. It is a legal document that we've written, but there were kind of some major themes that I worked with Jason on when we came up with the agreement and the proposed agreement. So the first is looking at that community dedicated space concept that I mentioned earlier. So that's a requirement council expects. So he is aware of that requirement. We've talked about some of the different options about what that could look like. So I mean, it could be a basketball court, it could be a playground, it could be a public cooking space, it could be trail systems. So it's left open to be quite creative, but the idea is that it's a public shared space that can be enjoyed. And we don't want it to be grass. It should be something creative and thoughtful that people will actually utilize. We also talked about pedestrian access. So the fact that this does have great access to the trails and it's already a very walkable street, it doesn't have a sidewalk, but if you go and monitor the area, a lot of people walk up and down Park Drive. It's a generally a recreation street because it does have access to the trails. So one of the requirements that we've asked for within the development agreement is that there's actually pedestrian access put in. So there's trails and a space for pedestrians to navigate the property around the vehicles. The next thing that we kind of talked about was keeping the development similar to the community aesthetics and design that's existing. So one of the ways that we've done that is by requiring a specific entrance design that would have a community design, landscaping, and an access that is consistent with the other properties in the area. The development agreement also asks for vegetation and beautification throughout the property that's consistent with the existing neighborhood. The next kind of highlight of the document was consideration for the neighboring properties. So there is a requirement in here. I talked a lot with Jason about the idea of maintaining the tree line that is there, trying to keep that vegetation buffer. But there's also a requirement for a 6-foot high fence between all neighboring properties or a 10-foot wide landscaping barrier. For parking, there's a requirement that there's clearly designated parking for tenants and visitors, and we've required 1.5 spaces per unit so that there won't be people parking on street. That should be sufficient parking on the property itself. And then finally, we talked about property maintenance and impacts. We talked a lot about stormwater management and managing how stormwater runs on that property so that neighboring properties are not impacted. As well as waste storage, making sure that it's enclosed and not visible from neighboring properties. And those are just the highlights. It's quite an extensive development agreement with a lot of policies. So that's attached to the report, and it's something that you can look at and go through a little closer if you want, or I can answer questions about later if necessary. Oh yes, we've even included some information requirement around the Dark Skies Initiative about the lighting in the area and making sure that it doesn't impact the neighboring properties, but also the tourism when it comes to the dark skies, which is a priority of council. So with all that being said, I really feel from my perspective and my experience as a planner that this application is consistent with council's intention to encourage and support high quality mixed residential housing within the municipality of Yarmouth. The developer has really taken the time to work with me and look at things like budget, how the property is going to be landscaped, how the buildings are going to be laid out, where the parking spaces will be, how it can become a really, really nice place for the tenants to live, but also for the neighboring properties to live with. So for that reason, I'm recommending that council approve the proposal to enter into the development agreement for a multi-unit residential development with Jason Murphy's numbered company at PID 901-33786 and PID 901-33836. So with that concludes my presentation on this proposal, and I'm going to open it up for the public hearing.
Okay, thank you very much. And the purpose of the public hearing is to hear from the public and to have counselors be able to provide any feedback that they wish, as well as answer questions. So are there questions or from council at this point in time? Yes, Councillor Allen.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So I'm not sure who to direct these the questions too. I'm just wondering, like in these development agreements where this is, you know, they're going to be looking for occupancy permits and stuff. Do the development agreements have to be 100% complete before we permit the develop? Like, at what point can people move in, I guess? Like, you know, do we have to have the landscaping and things done? Do we make sure the outbuildings are ready for any waste and stuff like that? You know, at what point are we satisfied and we actually would give an occupancy permit? I guess this would probably be more centered towards Roger, I'm thinking. So maybe Roger could help me with that one first, and I got another one after, if that's okay.
Okay.
Okay, Mr. Chair, if that's okay with you all.
Yes, Mr. Devine?
So in terms of the occupancy permits, we would monitor, once we issue the permits, we would monitor the construction the whole way through and make sure, of course, that everything's done according to code and all proper inspections are done. And when we're satisfied with that, from a building permit standpoint, we would issue the occupancy permits. And I'm not really sure exactly, because this is the first development agreement that I've dealt with like this, but I would think that we would have to have the landscaping and everything all in place for the most part, unless we're waiting for something like a seasonal vegetation growth to happen, like grass and stuff. I think we need most of the landscaping to be in place before we could issue that occupancy permit. But Caroline, you could correct me if I'm wrong there.
Yeah, so for development agreements, because it's a planning tool and planning document, it's actually addressed not through an occupancy permit, but through your development permit. So I should probably, I've explained what a development agreement is. What a development permit is when somebody's doing something as of right. So let's say they're building a shed or something that is allowed in an area. They still have to come in and get a permit from Roger to make sure that they're following the rules in the land use bylaw. So it would be the exact same process when it comes to a development agreement. So when it comes time to do this development, they'll come in, the developer will come in and apply for a development permit with Roger. And that development permit will include a site plan and the intention to meet all of the requirements of the development agreement. He would issue it, and then if they did not follow it or put in the requirements to his satisfaction, then at that point he could enforce. He could move to an enforcement stage. Does that make sense?
And I guess to my second part is, what type of enforcement do we have to uphold the development agreement and make sure things are done in a timely manner? You know, just basically for the community around them. You know, how long can things linger? And do we have any? I don't know what I'm looking for. Teeth, I guess, as far as whether we have to step in and make sure things get done.
Do you want to answer, Roger, or would you like me to? It's the same enforcement process as a land use bylaw infraction. So the first thing he would do is send a letter just advising the property owner that they are in violation of a requirement of their development agreement, requesting that they adhere to it. Usually he sets a time frame. And then from there, it can escalate. Usually it can go to, and it's handled differently in different municipalities. So I'm kind of looking at Roger to see, but usually I think it would go into a court system with yeah. So it's exactly the same as your land use bylaw. The difference is just that it's particular to this property and this development.
Thank you. Are there additional questions or follow-ups from council? Scanning, I'm seeing none. And so we'll hear next from the applicant, Jason Murphy. So Ms. Porter, if you can admit Jason, and we'll hear from Jason and ask Jason questions as appropriate.
Jason is here.
Hi, Mr. Murphy.
Hello.
Welcome. Welcome to the public hearing.
Thank you.
If there's anything you'd like to have the public here, feel free, and then we'll follow that with some questions from council.
Sure. So, I mean, I'm not going to go too deep into the agreement itself. I've worked closely with Carolyn on it, and I know folks have had a chance to see it. And I just wanted to kind of talk a little bit about the building that's there. So I want my next buildings to fall in line and be exactly like the building that's there. For those of you that know a little bit about it, it is a high quality construction. I've used a reputable local builder for this, and I've used the same reputable local builder to help me plan out the next set of buildings. To the best of my knowledge, I haven't received any complaints about what's happened there so far. I know there were a couple folks that were unhappy that there was a 4-unit going in the neighborhood at all, but as far as the way the building's run, the way the landscaping's been kept up, the way the garbage has been managed, and the tenants that are there, I've had no complaints from tenants, council folks, or neighbors. One of the things that I just wanted to briefly touch on is the housing shortage. I don't think anybody here needs me to tell you that there's a housing shortage. Some folks would call it a crisis in Yarmouth. My experience with this building is that before we even had the footings and foundation going in, I've had it full. Absolutely no advertising. People are so desperate for housing in our area. Somehow these folks figured out there was a building going in, who owns it, and they figured out a way to contact me. And I've been taking calls on a weekly basis ever since I built this building for people looking for housing. I can tell you some sad stories that people have told me that I don't even know, that, you know, in weeks to months they have no place to live, and is there any way I can help them? So of course, sadly, the building's full. The answer has to be no, but this development agreement is kind of my way to try and help solve that problem for the town and the municipality. The other thing I just want to say is, in my other job, my day job, I work as a human resources coordinator. And I can tell you, one of the troubles we have in my job in bringing young professionals into our area is housing. I've lost a number of hires over the last couple of years because people want to move into our area and work, but unfortunately they can't find housing, and we've lost those folks. So I just want to say that I am here to tell you, I do have a strong desire to work with council, with Carolyn, with the neighborhood to make this happen. I think it's a great opportunity to provide rentals for young professionals with families all the way up to senior citizens. So with that, I'll certainly take any questions anyone has.
Okay, so questions from councilors or staff? Not seeing any. Oh yes, I've got one. Councillor Hilton.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I guess the only concerns we really have is really the effect on the neighborhood. I like what you're saying about the housing crisis, and I couldn't agree more. As a councillor, we get a call every week for people looking for housing, and really we're not able to help them a lot of the time. And the quality of housing is another issue. So in the presentation by Caroline, it talked about a 10-foot barrier, and maybe this is for both of you. Did you guys discuss if it was going to be the 6-foot fence or the greenery? What kind of barrier are you going to put between your neighbors and yourself?
Yeah, so right now the plan is to put the fencing in, but to leave as much vegetation as I can. So if I can leave 10 feet, 15 feet of vegetation, I'm going to do it. But the plan is to put the fences in as well.
Thank you.
Sorry, Trevor, I just wanted to show the design. So this does show that the existing vegetation will remain, and then there's also fencing put in as well on the opposite side of the vegetation to try and give that buffering strip between the residents and the development.
Okay, thank you.
And I think I just want to, add one more thing there. I understand the desire for that from the neighboring properties. But I just, want to make it known that that's a desire for me too, because privacy is important to my potential tenants. So I want to make sure that, that they feel safe and they feel that their privacy is respected as well. So, you know, in order for me to operate a successful business, those privacy barriers are just as important to me as they are to the neighbors.
Thank you, Mr. Murphy. Additional questions from council or staff? Okay, there being none, Mr. Murphy, on behalf of council, I'd like to thank you for your comments. And they were very helpful, and it's nice to see a proponent working hand in glove with municipal staff in coming to a development agreement with considerable detail. So thank you very much for attending our public hearing and making your comments known to the public. Very much appreciated. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, moving on, we've got a call for written submissions, item 5, and a letter from residents, 5.1. And I'll call on our CAO, Victoria Brooks, perhaps to give an overview of the contents of the letter.
We did receive a couple of submissions, Mr. Chair, and 5.1 outlines a few concerns by some of the citizens, and some of which were addressed both in Ms. Robertson's presentation and in Mr. Murphy's presentation. There were some other pieces around some things that could be desirable in that neighborhood on the part of residents that council can consider moving forward. But what I mostly want to speak to, Mr. Chair, is the concern about access in 5.2. There are some residents who, because of COVID, we are doing our public hearing virtually, and there are a handful of residents who have expressed a barrier to accessing the public process. They can't participate virtually. So, that is something that, I take seriously, and I know council does too. So, it's possible council might want to consider having staff do an engagement with that handful of residents just to make sure they have a space to be heard, and then we can bring it back to council.
Okay, that's a helpful suggestion. So what I'm hearing you say is that we may likely delay the second reading that will take place in the subsequent regular council meeting tonight to the next month, holding it over until our February regularly scheduled meeting, just to allow that. Whatever you're planning on doing to happen.
Yeah, if you did second reading tonight, it wouldn't give a whole lot of credence to having a conversation with those residents. So, my recommendation would be that council do consider holding that over for 30 days.
Okay. Thank you. Yeah, that's helpful, and we'll deal with that issue in the upcoming regular council meeting in terms of removing that item from the agenda and placing on next month's agenda, potentially, if that's the wish of council. That's a recommendation of Ms. Brooks. So yes, Councillor Hurlbert.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Just for a point of clarity, because we have a public hearing tonight and we hear from the planner, we hear from the developer, we normally would hear from any concerned residents. We do have their letters on file. If we have an opportunity to listen to the residents' concerns, how are we able to then get the feedback from the developer on any concerns that they may have? So will the developer be able to be there and the municipal planner be able to be in attendance to for us to have that conversation again?
So
Well,
I
I'll
guess
hand that over to Councillor Brooks. No, not Councillor Brooks. Sorry, that's not it.
So, I guess, if it's council's wish that we provide a voice to those residents who have that technology barrier, it would be myself and Caroline and Roger and Jenny who would meet with them. And I think what we would do is listen to them and hear their concerns. We would bring that back to council. Now, a public hearing really isn't designed to have a project proponent and project objectors debate. That's not really the purpose. Although if there's something that comes back to council and you would like a response from the developer, then we most certainly would get you that response.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, CEO Brooks. Additional questions? I don't see any, so what I will, we'll go on to item 6, call for council comments. Are there any additional comments that councilors would make in terms of the public hearing? Okay, I'm not seeing any. Oh, yes, Councillor Hilton.
Thanks. I think I echo maybe some of Councillor Hobart's concerns that the other residents may not feel heard. So at any point in that conversation, if they say that, can we make sure that there is a meeting with the voting members of council so that we can hear that? I'm not sure what that would look like, but these are definitely different circumstances. We're having a public meeting with one attendee and it's the developer. And I'm not saying that I have an issue with that. I do support a lot of what the developer has said and agree with a lot of it, but I also want to make sure people feel heard. So at any point, if it's an issue for them that they feel like they're not being heard after that meeting, maybe move forward with a meeting with us as well.
Through me to CEO Brooks.
Yeah, absolutely. You know, I think the challenge is always, you know, managing this pandemic piece and how that impacts your due process. But absolutely, I think I'll just double check the letter. Let me click on the link because it is not a lot of families that expressed an access challenge. I'll just click on that here.
Even if it's the ones that have identified the need or the fact that they have that access challenge, if they have questions for us directly.
Right. So to be clear then, Councillor Hilton, we do have a 10-person limit in gathering. So, you know, we would only be able to meet, the idea would be to meet with the residents who said they have an access barrier.
Agreed.
Because everybody else received notifications, there were public notifications, there were letters. And, you know, we only received a letter from a handful of residents who said they didn't have the technology to participate this way. So this would be an accommodation for those people.
Yeah, I'm okay with that.
Thank you. Good questions. Additional comments? From council for the public hearing? Okay, there being none, I'll call for adjournment of the public hearing. Got a mover in Councillor Cushing, seconder in Councillor Cushing, seconder in Councillor Hilton. My apologies. All those in favor signify by saying aye. All those opposed? Motion carried. Thank you. And we'll reconvene shortly for the regular council meeting at 7 o'clock. Thank you so much, everybody.
I think, Mr. Chair, we're going to go right into council if that's